The moment my foot found only air where the brake pedal should have offered resistance, my world shattered into 1,000 shards of terror. It was a sickening, gut-wrenching lurch, not of the car, but of my own soul. I had driven this classic '68 Mustang for decades, felt its every nuance, its every pulse. That metal box held the ghost of my late husband, Daniel, and the countless hours we spent painstakingly restoring its engine, its chrome, its very soul. This car was an extension of me, and it was screaming in protest, a runaway missile hurtling down the unforgiving slope of a Los Angeles hill, its brakes severed. A cold, insidious clarity washed over me, far more chilling than the wind whipping through the open convertible top. This wasn't a mechanical failure. It was an act of malice. The image of my granddaughter, Sierra, hunched over the wheel well just yesterday, flashed into my mind. I remembered the unnatural way she jumped when I called her name, the greasy smear on her fingertips, the glint of a small, broken plastic tool in the gravel. Every fragmented memory, every fleeting moment of unease, now coalesced into a monstrous, undeniable truth. The car was trying to kill me, and the person holding the knife was the one I loved more than life itself. In that single, terrifying heartbeat, the horror of my impending doom was eclipsed only by the profound and soul-crushing agony of her betrayal. I wasn't just losing my life. I was losing my last link to a beautiful, uncomplicated past to the one person who was supposed to carry that legacy. I was on a one-way trip to a fiery wreck, and the person who put me there was family. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to the channel and press that bell icon so you don't miss our next true stories, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Your support helps us share these messages with more people who need hope. My name is Evelyn, and at 75, I've had a life filled with simple joys and a quiet, profound faith. The '68 Mustang was more than a car. It was a testament to my late husband, Daniel. We restored it together, bolt by bolt, and it held the memories of every road trip, every argument, every laugh. It was my anchor to the past, a symbol of a life well lived. Daniel and I had spent our entire marriage breathing life back into that beautiful, broken machine. The process was slow, methodical, and filled with a love that could only be forged in a dusty garage with grease under your fingernails. I remember Daniel, his gentle hands, his face smudged with oil, a look of pure contentment as he finally got the carburetor to hum just right. We'd take turns meticulously sanding the body, then painting it in that deep, impossible red, a color that seemed to hold the warmth of every sunset we'd ever watched together. Every scratch on its chrome, every soft leather wrinkle in its seats was a chapter of our life story. When Daniel passed, the car became a living memory, a sacred space. It wasn't a mere vehicle, it was my final, tangible connection to the man I loved, a rolling monument to a time when things were built to last, when loyalty and dedication meant something. My granddaughter, Sierra, however, saw it as a relic, a tomb of an outdated past. At 21, she was a whirlwind of social media trends and fleeting obsessions, living a digital life that celebrated flash over substance. Her world was a meticulously curated aesthetic of minimalist design, matcha lattes, and clean, white spaces. She moved from one fleeting obsession to the next, macrobiotic diets, urban gardening, digital art, each one a performative act for her online audience. The Mustang, in her eyes, was an eyesore, a vintage trap that kept her tied to a life she considered hopelessly uncool. It was loud. It smelled of gasoline and old leather, and its raw, mechanical heart felt like a crude affront to her sleek, silent, and electric-powered vision of the future. The tension between us was not over money, but over two entirely different value systems. She had been living with me for the past 6 months, a temporary arrangement that had stretched on, and the friction was palpable. I would find her subtly mocking the car on her video calls, holding her phone up to show her friends the dinosaur in the driveway. "My grandma's car is like a total liability," she'd say with a theatrical sigh, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's so old school, it's just not practical." I would try to share a story about Daniel and the car, but her eyes would glaze over, her attention already stolen by a notification on her phone. Her constant chatter was about the electric vehicle she was saving for, a silent, smooth machine that was as sterile and detached as her online persona. She'd casually mentioned the Mustang's market value, a number she had clearly researched, dropping it into conversation like a bomb. "Did you know a '68 Mustang can go for like six figures?" she'd ask, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp and calculating. "With that kind of money, you could get a brand new Tesla and still have enough for a down payment on a house." She saw the car as pure capital, a static asset ripe for liquidation, while I saw it as a living, breathing history of my life with Daniel. I didn't need the money. I had a quiet, comfortable life. What I needed was to protect the memory of my husband, and in my heart, I knew the car was the only way I could do that. It was a line in the sand, a non-negotiable part of my existence, and it had become an unbearable obstacle in her quest for a life of polished, superficial perfection. The week leading up to the engine's failure was an unsettling masquerade of feigned affection and an unnatural curiosity. Sierra, who had previously shown nothing but disdain for my garage and all its greasy contents, was suddenly a fixture in my sanctuary. She'd hover around the Mustang with her phone in her hand, snapping pictures and asking a flurry of questions that were far too specific to be casual. "Grandma, where exactly is the brake fluid reservoir?" she'd ask, her voice a little too high, a little too eager. Or, "How do you know if the brake pads are worn down? Is it a sound, or can you see it?" I would dismiss her with a gentle explanation, a brief lesson on car maintenance, but a cold finger of doubt would trail down my spine. This wasn't her. The girl who used to complain about the scent of motor oil was now actively seeking it out, leaning over the engine bay with a look of intense, almost predatory focus. She would make excuses to be alone with the car, claiming she wanted to take some cool vintage photos for her feed. And I, in my blindness, would let her. I wanted to believe that her interest was genuine, a sign that she was finally starting to appreciate the legacy I was trying to pass on. I was a grandmother, and grandmothers are programmed to see the best in their grandchildren, even when the evidence points to something else entirely. I told myself she was just curious about the mechanical world, that she was trying to bridge the gap between our generations. I wanted so desperately to be wrong about the feeling in my gut. One morning, just as the sun was beginning to break through the Los Angeles haze, I walked out to the garage to fetch something. I found Sierra crouched low, her body a hunched, clandestine silhouette under the front bumper. She was holding a small flashlight, the beam illuminating a section of the brake line. Her hands, usually so clean and manicured for her endless selfies, were smudged with a dark, viscous substance. When the sound of my sandals on the concrete announced my presence, she jumped so violently she dropped the light. It clattered to the ground, rolling to a stop, its beam cutting a stark, jarring circle on the dusty floor. Her face, when she looked up, was a mask of panic, a fleeting expression I'd never seen before. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a forced, breathless smile. "Grandma, you scared me," she chirped, her voice a nervous tremor. Just looking at the hubcaps. They're so shiny. I was trying to get a good angle." The excuse was paper-thin, transparent. Why would she be looking at the hubcaps with a flashlight pointed at the brake line? Why was she sweating in the cool morning air? She hurried off, a guilty stain on her jeans. I noticed the lingering smell of motor oil and something else, a strange, sharp, chemical tang I couldn't place. I knelt down, a quiet woman of faith, a mother to the girl who had just lied to me. My eyes scanned the gravel near the front tire, and that's when I saw it. A small, broken piece of a black plastic tool, the kind used for prying open tight spots, was nestled in the dirt. My heart pounded, a heavy, insistent drum against my ribs. I picked it up, and the plastic was slick with a fresh, greasy residue. Every fragmented memory, every fleeting moment of unease, now coalesced into a monstrous, undeniable truth. The car was not a static piece of history to her. It was an obstacle, and she had just tried to remove it. With the car now silent and my heart heavy with a strange foreboding, I sat for a moment in the driver's seat. It wasn't a sense of anger, but of a quiet, profound presence. The sun felt warmer on my face, and the silence in the car felt less like an absence of sound and more like a holy space. I closed my eyes, and a single, clear thought echoed in my mind, not in words, but in a feeling of pure, absolute stillness. It was a gentle, unmistakable voice in my soul, a sense of protection and peace that settled my racing heart. Do not leave the car. I opened my eyes, and a deep, undeniable certainty washed over me. This was not a coincidence. This was an intervention. The engine's refusal to run was not a mechanical failure. It was a miraculous sign, a whisper from God, a quiet and merciful warning. The silence of the engine, which had moments before been a source of terror, now became a sanctuary. The air, which had been thick with my fear, was now filled with an almost tangible sense of divine peace. My hands, still clutching the steering wheel, were no longer shaking. I felt a profound stillness in my very being, a stillness that went beyond the physical. It was a spiritual quietude, a balm on the wounds of betrayal and the horror of what had almost been. I took a deep breath, and the scent of gasoline and old leather that usually filled the car now seemed to mingle with something sweeter, something like ozone after a summer rain. I thought of Daniel and how he would always say, "God works in mysterious ways, Evie." I had never understood those words more profoundly than in this moment. The same car he and I had built, a vessel of our love, had become a shield. The engine that had so lovingly come to life 1,000 times before had, in its stillness, saved my life. My faith, a quiet, constant hum throughout my life, now roared to life. I was not alone. I was not abandoned. The one person who had turned on me was not the end of my story. There was a greater hand at play, a greater plan being unveiled. I looked out the windshield, the sun now fully cresting over the hills, casting a golden light over the city below. The world felt different, imbued with a new purpose. The terror had been replaced by a quiet, unwavering resolve. I wasn't going to let this act of malice define me. I was a survivor, chosen and protected, and this moment of grace was the turning point. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew I would face it with a strength that had just been gifted to me. I had been saved not just from a physical threat, but from the spiritual collapse that comes with a crushing betrayal. Driven by an instinct I couldn't explain, I got out of the car. My legs felt heavy, as if I were moving through water, but they carried me forward. My gaze fell to the ground, and my eyes landed on the small, broken piece of plastic. I reached down and picked it up, my hands trembling as the truth began to piece itself together. It was a small black pry tool, its edge frayed, a tiny fragment of a much larger, insidious crime. The plastic was still slick with a fresh, greasy residue. A cold dread, sharp and penetrating, pierced through the quiet peace I had just found. I stood there for a long moment, the tiny piece of plastic an enormous weight in my hand, a silent confession. I closed my fist around it, the sharp edge digging into my palm, but I barely felt it. My eyes followed the path from the broken tool to the wheel well, and I knelt down, a woman of faith and a mother to the girl who had done this. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't need to be a mechanic to see the truth. There, snaking along the undercarriage, were the brake lines. They were not completely severed. It was a clumsy, amateur attempt, a testament to Sierra's lack of practical knowledge, but they were frayed and torn, a few millimeters of rubber and metal holding together a threadbare connection. The sun glinted off a single exposed wire, and I saw a fresh, deep gash where the tool had slipped and gouged the line. Had the engine started, had I driven away, the moment I touched the brake pedal at the bottom of the long, steep hill near my home, they would have snapped. The gentle pressure I would have applied to slow down for the stop sign would have been the final, fatal blow. The car would have become a runaway missile, and I, its helpless passenger. My terror, now fully realized, was surpassed only by a wave of crushing sorrow. It wasn't a punishment, it was a quiet, unmerited mercy. A loving hand had kept me from driving toward my death. My faith had been proven, my doubt had been erased, but in its place was a heartbreak so profound it felt physical. This wasn't a stranger's attack, a random act of violence. This was my own flesh and blood, My only living link to my daughter, the person I had raised since she was a little girl, a person who had always been a source of light, had tried to extinguish mine. The reality of it hit me like a physical blow. The quiet peace from the engine silence now had a new, agonizing meaning. It was not just a shield from danger, it was a merciful pause, a moment for my soul to catch up to the horror of what had just been revealed. A pause that allowed me to find my strength again. I finally fumbled for my phone, my fingers still shaking, and called for help. My voice, when I spoke, was not a scream of fear but a broken whisper, a plea for help. Unaware that her plan had been foiled, Sierra had already left in her own car, a borrowed, rickety sedan she used for her side hustles. She was driving on a winding, two-lane road in the Hollywood Hills, her mind buzzing with triumphant thoughts. The afternoon sun, sharp and unfiltered, streamed through her windshield, but she barely noticed. She was lost in the digital echo chamber of her own success, a whirlwind of notifications and congratulatory emojis. Her phone was clutched in her hand, the screen a bright, mesmerizing portal to her carefully constructed world. She was texting her friends, boasting about how she'd finally gotten rid of that old rust bucket and was ready to sell it. Her texts were punctuated with a string of triumphant, self-congratulatory emojis, winking faces, money bags, and raised hands. "The dinosaur is finally out of the way," she typed, her thumbs flying across the screen. "Grand's gonna sell it and I'll get my cut. Hello, Tesla." A wave of giddy excitement coursed through her, the thrill of victory overpowering any flicker of conscience. She saw her future unfurling before her eyes. A sleek, silent electric car, a clean white apartment, a life unburdened by the greasy, inconvenient past. It was all so close, so perfectly within her grasp. In her haste and distraction, she sped through a yellow light that had just turned red, her eyes glued to the screen, her thumbs ready to send the next message. A truck, a looming, rattling beast of a machine, blared its horn, but the sound was lost to the pop music blasting from her stereo. She swerved instinctively, a panicked, thoughtless jerk of the steering wheel. Her borrowed vehicle, a rust-colored, rickety sedan she used for her side hustles, was no match for the speed or the sudden momentum. It spun out of control, tires screaming, a violent, sickening shriek that tore through the calm Hollywood air. The world outside her window became a blur of green trees and brown earth, a chaotic, spinning canvas of her own making. The car slammed into a concrete divider with a violent, sickening impact that felt as if the world itself had come to a stop. The sound of crunching metal, shattering glass, and splintering plastic was a symphony of her own hubris, a gruesome final chord. The force of the impact was so severe that rescuers had to use the jaws of life to get her out, the hydraulic hiss of the machine a cruel, ironic counterpoint to her earlier, triumphant texts. She was pulled from the wreckage, alive, but her legs were crushed beneath the twisted wreckage of the dashboard. Her phone, the source of her downfall, was found clutched in her hand, its screen cracked but still glowing, the incriminating text about her plan still on the screen. The poetic justice was swift and absolute. The car she had so desperately coveted for a new life was not her escape, but her reckoning. The money she had so ruthlessly sought from the sale of my beloved Mustang would now go to pay for a life of painful physical rehabilitation. The police, using the text as evidence, pieced together the entire story and arrested her from her hospital bed. The very tool of her betrayal had become the instrument of her punishment, a digital trail that led directly to her own destruction. Today, I am surrounded by a quiet, a silence that has become a sacred thing. My Mustang is fully repaired, but it sits in the garage, a silent testament to a miracle. I have visited Sierra in the rehabilitation center. Her eyes, once so full of ambition and vanity, are now empty of light. I do not visit to gloat. I visit to tell her I forgive her. My forgiveness is not for her sake. It is a gift to myself, an act of faith that sets my own heart free. I have since sold the Mustang, but not for the money. Instead, I established the Daniel and Evelyn Thomas Foundation. The proceeds from the sale of my beloved car now fund scholarships for young artists, helping them realize their dreams with the money that was so nearly used for my own demise. The story of my life and my car is one of unwavering faith in the face of betrayal. Your support helps us share these messages of hope and resilience with more people who are searching for their own beacon of light. Thank you, and may God bless you in your darkest moments and beyond.